So thank you. I see a few of you on the platform here who have been on few sessions today. I mean, it's been a lot of stuff, and it's actually, unsurprisingly, along this topic, it's sometimes kind of heavy. But it's really, really important. So I appreciate you being here, whether you're just joining for the first time today. We've had probably 10 plus sessions already. We got a handful more, and I'm going to spend the next half hour slowing down a little bit. I'm going to focus on Red Thread Research's DEI and belonging study that just came out. I'm also going to talk a little bit about my perspectives and ideas on this critical topic, and then I'm going to open it up for questions. So my presentation portion is not going to be too long. I imagine we're going to go until the bottom of the hour, maybe a little after, and then we'll take a break, and then we'll continue with the program. So super appreciate you all being here. The way I'm positioning this discussion, and I'm going to share my screen and see how elegantly I can do it, because I've asked people to do this all day, so I should be able to do it. So let's see how successful I am. And I'm going to hide that. And so far, so good. So yeah, here we go. Virtue. I'm going to unbundle this a little bit. And I want to land with some ideas for you individually, for your organization, as well as for your team or work group, and potentially with your friend group in your personal lives. So to stage this, I'm going to talk a little bit about who I am. And I am first and foremost a father. Our son, Cash, just left for college earlier today while I was actually on camera. And so I am obviously having emotions about that, and I'm excited and I'm sad. And this is his second year of school, so it's not the first time he left. But him leaving the house is something that instills emotions in parents. And if you've gone through it, you certainly know what I mean. If you have young kids, you will at some point. I'm sure. Our daughter is a senior in high school. And she is going through interviews now for colleges. She has all her applications in. So it's very exciting times for her. And I'm going to be coaching her volleyball team, assuming we have a volleyball season coming up in a couple months. So, I mean, it's wonderful to have been close to them over the past 10 months. When everything happened with COVID, I was actually in Australia at the time. And since then, I've been over the hill here 4 times. So I've been really isolated. And I don't mean that as a bad thing. I just mean it as a matter of fact. And that has actually been wonderful to connect with my 2 kids and see what they're struggling with, be their confidant, and frankly, have them be a resource to me. And so as we approach this diversity, equity, inclusion, and feeling of belonging, my mental construct is actually my family unit. Do my kids feel safe in the home? Do they feel open to express themselves? Do they feel involved in key decisions? Everything from meal planning to what we do on a particular weekend, assuming we can go out, of course. So it's a mental model. I'm not going to say it's right, but I encourage you to think about your own experience as we go through the next 10, 15 minutes. If you've heard me present before, I talk about not only employee experience, but the human experience. And after the basics, I contend that we want 3 things. We want to be seen, we want to be heard, and we want to be empowered. In other words, we don't want to be invisible. We don't want to be ignored. And more often than not, particularly in the knowledge economy, we don't want to be told what to do. And like a child, we want to be empowered to apply our creativity and innovative ideas to get things done. And so, particularly given the nature of work now, where many either consciously or unconsciously throw a bunch of work at people and say, figure it out, that can be burdensome. And we have to honor people's individual capacity rooted in their reality. As in the picture, if you have 2 kids at home and you're trying to get work done, and you have an elderly parent to take care of. I mean, and you can't see them because they're a COVID risk. I mean, it is. I can only imagine. Thankfully, our kids are older now, and they're pretty self-sufficient. At the same time, I cannot say, okay, because you went to such a university, because you hold that role, that because whether or not you're a man, woman, a certain ethnic background, race, or what have you, it doesn't mean you have the same capacity. It doesn't necessarily even mean that you have the same capability to do that work day in and day out. We have to understand individual experiences. The idea of personas is something I've long championed. I think it's important. It can be valuable for analytical purposes and helping form people strategies. At the same time, we can't just use a broad brush to tackle DEI and belonging initiatives. So just to unpack this a little bit, I said unpack. I usually don't say unpack. That might be the first time I've ever said it. But OQIs is what I contend. So when people say, hey, I want to give feedback, hey, I want to hear your feedback, I don't really, it doesn't resonate with me personally. What I advocate are OQIs, observations, questions, and ideas. And this is a way for people to be seen, heard, and empowered. So in other words, as opposed to telling people what to do, telling people, hey, I understand your experience because so-and-so has done this, is that, hey, this is what I observed. Stay in curiosity, stay in that growth mindset, say, ask some questions, this affirmative inquiry. Say, oh gosh, I understand that. Hey, based on everything I've heard, hey, how about this idea? How about this idea? What are some of your ideas? It's a much more empowering conversation than just hey, here's what we're going to do, go do this. So with that as an anchor, I want to get more specific around what we have to do as individuals. So we have to understand what I call, based on my background, and this is ironic, based on my structure of interpretation, we have to understand our own structures of our interpretation. We have to develop a coherent narrative over the arc of our lives. How did we form the lens by which we view the world? And is that lens free of bias? Absolutely not. Are we going to be aware of our biases and then hopefully be less biased? I hope so. I grew up in a very diverse community. I played sports, football, basketball, and track, which by its very nature is diverse. And so I am, based on my structure of interpretation, my set of experiences that help form my worldview, I like to think I am a pretty inclusive guy. That being said, I heard this term earlier today. For me to say, oh yeah, I'm an ally, I got that figured out, I don't think is the right mindset. It's actually, I'm an ally in training. I can always be a better ally. And how am I going to do that? Well, first and foremost, I'm going to cite one of my heroes, Joe Ehrman here, who wrote the book Inside Out Coaching. He's the main character of a book called Season of Life, which is a New York Times bestseller written by a longtime friend of mine, Jeffrey Marks, who's a Pulitzer Prize winning writer. So these books are fantastic. Can't recommend them enough, particularly that first one if you're a football fan. So Joe talks about the fact that if we're going to coach people and we're going to lead people, that we have to understand ourselves, how we show up, what are our scars. And oh gosh, I'm talking about a D&I event and I'm here, listening to Alan. I'm going to engage in this conversation, network a little bit. And now we're talking about self-help stuff. And it's not that necessarily, but what it is really understanding your triggers, your scars, what helps you understand how you show up to others. Are you providing a safe place for individuals to express themselves? So there are ways to go about it. There are practices. Yes, there's meditation. Yes, there's certain mindful techniques that can be employed. I'm not going to go into that. That's not the purpose of today's discussion. But what I will say, if you are going to be an advocate, if you're going to be an ally, if you're going to champion DEI programs, then you're going to have to do some work. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Everybody I have talked with today and up to this point in this space has effectively validated that. And then it invites the question, who's responsible for creating that space? Is it the individual? Is it the organization? Is it the team? And we're going to talk a little bit about that. As you likely know, Microsoft transformed their culture around growth mindset, this insatiable curiosity and willingness to learn. How does that affect diversity, equity, and inclusion? I would say a lot. And I'm going to, again, get to that in a bit. I also want to highlight Quiet by Susan Cain, which is another one of my favorite books. And there's also another book that I didn't put up here by Steven Pinker, who's a Harvard psychologist who wrote the book The Blank Slate, which is a very long essay around Western society's ignorance of human nature. We assume people are who they are based on where they come from, what they look like, and all these other factors. And we all have certain predispositions that oftentimes go outside these assumptions. And why do we even create assumptions? Well, they give us comfort. Well, he came from there, therefore he fits in that box, and I know that box, so I'm going to put him there. Well, she looks like that, therefore I'm going to put her in that box, and I know that box, and I have a host of assumptions and biases around that box, but I'm going to put it there because that makes me feel safe. The idea that there's this whole array of people out there is scary. It's intimidating, and we have to be vulnerable, particularly when not only we talk about how they look and their visual characteristics and some of their experiences, but actually how they show up, how their brain functions, how their body, heart connection functions. So do we have the skills as individuals to hold people in safety? Oftentimes not. Did we learn it at home? Probably not. Did we learn it through our educational experiences? Probably not. Did we learn it through our sports experiences? Maybe a little bit. Where do we learn this in the arc of life? Where do we learn how to be compassionate and kind while also being courageous and a self-advocate? There's no good answer in the United States anyway. And that's where I encourage organizations and individuals and others to get together and let's go on this journey together. So this came up earlier, and I'm going to stay true to myself as my voice starts to go out the window, is that we have to be talking the same language. We have to be understanding where other people are coming from. So I cite this Chinese proverb all the time. And with our kids, with professionals, the beginning of wisdom is calling things by their right names. And within this context, let's talk about diversity. What is diversity? I'm not going to answer that question right now. I'm going to have you think about it, but let's think about what equity is. Well, fairness, inclusion, having people feel inclusion, but how's that different than belonging? We also in organizations have engagement programs, engagement initiatives. We're talking about safety. We talk physical safety, psychological safety, emotional safety. We also have programs around employee experience, worker experience. We also have professional development initiatives for a certain reason, mostly for the organization, but it's also a driver of engagement. So that makes business sense to have development programs, also to foster innovation and serve as a competitive advantage. So these oftentimes are disparate programs. And I believe we have an opportunity, and in fact, I think we need to align these programs systematically, because too often what happens, diversity, equity, inclusion leader is an individual, him or herself, they're at a VP or even a C-level title now, so they're given a very prominent position, but they're grossly under-resourced oftentimes. And they have to rely on their influence abilities, their partnerships. And so is diversity, equity, inclusion the purpose an organization exists? No, it's not. Is it a necessary element to sustain and enhance an organization? I would say absolutely. So let's use a different framing right now, because my curiosity, my question for you all is, what is the overarching construct? Are we still going to remain in these silos, these various initiatives? So this is what I would like to put forth. What we're talking about really is culture. And I do not mean for this to be a big aha and like, whoa, that's a mind blower. But culture is a term that's been out there a long time. And no doubt you've heard this quote from Peter Drucker: culture eats strategy for lunch. So, okay, so culture is like really important, right? So are we consciously creating culture? I don't know. But, what the heck are we talking about when we talk about culture? Well, what I contend it is, and this is my definition, and it's a synthesis of many definitions that I've come across over the years, and this is the one that I like the most. A culture is the stories. Going back to Steven Pinker contends that stories are the building blocks of thought, not word sentences, but stories. It's what sticks, it's what resonates. When we try and formulate thoughts downstream, it's stories. It's the interconnectivity of elements that have these coherent narratives that stick. So what stories are people telling themselves and others about their experience at work? But not only at work, at home, on the playing field or whatever, but our focus today is at work. So those stories are your culture, period, stop. You can want your culture to be all these other things. You might think your culture is something, but there are people out there talking all the time. And in aggregate, that's your culture. Now, then it invites the question, well, do I have those stories captured? Is the delta between what I believe the culture to be and those stories really small, thus accurate? Or is it really big? Am I just, out to lunch? So, and who are the owners of we are the owners of our own stories. So as we go into our work life, we're writing our own narrative. And certainly we take inputs from our employer and the experience that they provide us. Did we get our computer on time? Is this a safe environment? Someone misbehaved and there was no intervention. That all add to the narrative. But at the end of the day, we interpret things and then we form our own stories. So we have to take ownership of that, good or bad, right or wrong, whatever. At the end of it, our organizational, functional, and team leaders, they can help consciously create positive, inclusive experiences. So this goes back to employee experience. And are we creating these inclusive environments, the sense of belonging? And I love this notion. I've long, I get like this when people say, employee experience is a new thing. No, employee experience has been around for a long time. In the mid-90s, there was a book, and I forget the gentleman's name, called The Experience Economy. And it was one of the books that we read as a leadership team when I was living and working in Moscow, Russia, and Kiev, Ukraine. And we talked about, I was running a water company at the time. We actually went into people's homes. So we talked about the worker experience and, are we empowering them with the tools and resources when they're walking up 5 flights of stairs with water bottles, on their shoulders in the middle of winter, and they got to go and look nice for somebody who opens the door at 7 p.m. at night and they're home alone. That worker experience is going to influence the customer experience. And we as leaders had the opportunity to buy good handles, buy comfortable trucks, buy uniforms that were comfortable as well. All these things that we did organizationally to improve the employee experience affected the downstream employee experience, and it affected the culture because it showed that we cared. And those were little tactical things, but beyond that, and not to say that we were perfect, because that's not what I want to imply, but I do want to highlight that organizational, functional, team leaders have this opportunity and responsibility to create these experiences that makes people feel valued, that they make feel, observed, seen, heard, and empowered. So from there, I'm going to ask, I'm going to go through this research and then I'm going to open it up for questions. So I'm going to unbundle this infographic real quick, and it's done by our research partner, Red Thread Research, Stacia Gar, Priyanka, and Danny Johnson, and a handful of others. And sorry, I don't have everybody's name in front of me, but I really celebrate the work that they have been doing, not only on this DEI and belonging research, but they also had our people analytics research study. So you can go to redthreadresearch.com and check it out. So obviously this is an eye chart. This is downloadable on their website, but I'm going to highlight a few things real quick that resonate with me. there are some shifts happening that did happen and that will continue to happen. Diversity, equity, inclusion, and I'm going to call it DEI for simplicity. For right now, it's been around for a long time. And arguably, it has underdelivered. And that's no fault of those who have been in DEI. I will say that out loud, and I will say it loudly and clearly. It's if we point to an underlying cause, it's been a lack of commitment, lack of resources by leadership. It's been more of a box to check as opposed to an initiative that really needs to be instrumental in the formation and enhancement of a culture, like we just talked about. That has shifted significantly over the past year for reasons that are obvious now. Is it then going to deliver over the course of 2021 and beyond? And as you see in topic 2 here, there is more openness among executives to address this topic and have authentic conversations themselves, to do the self-work and also empower resources throughout the organization. And the expansion of diversity or DEI efforts are going to happen not from DEI as the central place, but we talk about learning in the flow of work. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is going to happen within the flow of work as well. And it's going to leverage existing processes and resources. And to highlight that, I go to this next, this graphic. 80% want brands to help solve society's problems. So it is a virtuous effort that is going to help the culture be more attractive to prospective employees, is going to elevate the employment brand at the end of the day. 64% want companies to set an example. So they want to be associated with it. It's really, again, important to their brand and how they feel about their company, the commitment to it. And 71% trust small and medium-sized employers to do what's right on systematic racism and racial injustice. So that means that these smaller organizations that oftentimes are privately held are more agile. And having worked with some of them myself, I see that. There's less bureaucracy, there's less permissions to ask, arguably the risks are less, although that's very arguably the case because there's more vulnerability economically with small and mid-sized companies. But at the same time, there's more speed and agility as well. The other thing that I want to highlight, and this is going to be, I just have, I think, 3 more slides after this, is 6 ways to pilot diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging efforts. Getting clear with your why. And we've talked about it today, and I will emphasize the point. What is your North Star? What does success look like? And Victor Akasile and I talked about it's really progress in the right direction. I mean, to wake up one day and high five people and think we got this solved is not a realistic goal. However, not achieving a better experience and more inclusive culture cannot always be an excuse-laden thing. Oh, we're not there yet. Just excuses just pile up in perpetuity. There has to be decisions made, as Paul Rubenstein eloquently said earlier as well. Say choices are clear. This boundary is set, and we have to work within it. This is a non-negotiable. Let's move forward. Which relates to number 2, these goals and how to achieve them, and who wants to achieve them, and for who's going to benefit, need to be clear. And I will contend, and this is something that I get really excited about as I process it. Diversity, equity, and inclusion has this implication that I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this training program. I'm going to be more inclusive because it benefits somebody else. That is true in most cases. I'm going to protect a class of people, make them feel more safe, included, all fine and good. But it's actually going to benefit the individual as well. To be empowered to create more safe places, to help people express themselves and then take more appropriate decisions. That's a huge benefit. That's just becoming an evolved human being. And it's just a much more powerful position to come in. So one of the goals has to be around individual development. Formulating the strategy, as I highlighted at the outset, this has to be a systematic approach. It has to be strategic. It can't be just one program that people go through staring at a screen and answering some questions. There has to be a systematic strategic effort, which goes into levers and activities. Not all these levers are going to have equal impact. So really being conscious of the decisions that you make and what you do and not do is going to matter. And that's where data can really help. And which I'm going to segue to the last one, because data creates transparency around these processes and also helps you understand how you're moving. And I want to echo again what Paul Rubenstein shared. Even if, I mean, these are slow moving metrics in many cases. When we talk about feelings of inclusiveness, engagement, turnover, internal mobility, learning programs, these are not spikes. These are not exciting graphs to look at. That being said, when you look at them, when you cluster them differently, it's going to shed light on the areas that you can focus on. So having a data strategy early on, in other words, don't create initiative and, okay, how are we going to measure that? No, think about measurement up front. How are the measures going to help inform the story that you want to tell so you can take appropriate action? And the reason I put technology last now, if you understand the stories you want to tell and the required data that's going to help support those stories, then you can select technology. So I can cite Vadir Raimundsen from Reykjavik Energy did exactly that. He said, okay, I want to tell the story. I want better insight. And then he went and selected a technology that was appropriate to harness that data and tell that story. So I love where this is going. So there's more to share within the actual study itself. A couple more things. 3 trends to chart the course. Conversations, and the reason I pause here is I keep going back and forth with many, like, is it the responsibility of an organization to create forums to have these types of discussions? From a virtuous point of view, I say yes, it's a no-brainer. From a kind of business-oriented point of view, I might argue with myself and say, well, that's really a nice to have. That's a distraction from the core work tasks. But ultimately, whether it be organization-sponsored or an individual taking initiative on their own, or if it's a team lead or a group lead, say, no, this is what we're going to do, conversations have to happen, and they have to happen on an ongoing basis. And highlight one of our partners, Ripple for Good, who are facilitating those conversations on an ongoing basis. And they're doing outstanding work. So check out rippleforgood.org or .io. I don't, but look it up and I can share that in the notes as well. So bring back caregivers. We talked in a previous session and a couple of sessions today about what's happening with women specifically, but caregivers in general. I'm going to highlight this notion of capacity within the employee experience. Do people have the same amount of time and resources to do the job that we're doing formerly? There's this presumption that they do. More evolved companies have actually asked what's going on for you individually and scaling the work back accordingly. Some have actually adjusted comp. Some have not liked that. Others have, well, that's fair. But at the same time, we have to understand that people have different things going on in their lives. And so it's not only about diversity ethnically and what have you, but it's diversity of life stages and what other requirements are going on for you. And then finally, walk the talk. It's one thing to say this is a good thing to do. But as you see, 38% of S&P 500 companies announced initiatives and action plans since George Floyd. That's great. That either means that only 38% did that, or there was a balance or close to it that had initiatives in place beforehand. Frankly, I would have liked to have seen this number be much, 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 much higher. So where I'm going to land with this is, okay, we went through the infographic, did a broad swath of the research. What the heck do we do? And I would put the question this way. Well, what do we do individually? What do we do with our friend group? What do we do with our work group? And what do we do more systematically, organizationally? And so as I land the plane here, I'm going to just focus on this first one, and we can discuss the other elements. Is what language are we using day to day? What is our self-talk? So are we as individuals ready to change in this regard? And I grew up, I'm 53 years old now, and I grew up being coached sports by Vietnam vets. And my father's a former police officer. military as well. And it is the case where, suffice it to say, and this is not a criticism of those individuals who are influential in my life, it was a sign of the times. However, there was language that was being used that, in today's terms, is grossly improper. Even in those terms, it was grossly improper. Not many people know this because it's not widely seen. There was a really bad racial slur in the movie The Bad News Bears, which is one of the most popular movies in the mid-'70s. I mean, it was really, really, really bad. And it was normalized language. And so as I got older, I started to become aware that that word and other words like it were bad. They made people feel bad. And so I had the self-awareness, and maybe it's just who I am, or maybe my friend group or my parents or whomever said, that's not okay. But more broadly, are we conscious of not only the language that we speak, but the language that's going on in our head? And can we intervene in that self-talk and get to a more virtuous, kind, compassionate, curious place? Because in the end, a lot of this self-talk, as I say in this last bullet, is rooted in our environment and our experience. And those create biases. And if we're going to uproot that, then we need to admit, to our story. We need to develop that coherent narrative about what brought us to this place in time. So I'm going to pause there. I'm going to stop sharing my slides. I'm going to open up for conversation for a few minutes. And then I am going to take a nap. No, I'm not going to take a nap. I'm going to rest for a little bit before and probably get my voice back. So I'm going to see if I did that. So I'm looking at the feed and the Q&A, and if not, I'm going to ask myself a couple questions and then I'll sign off. So I am going to ask myself one question because I didn't cover it as thoroughly as I would have liked. It's this notion of capacity. So many organizations are struggling with how to measure performance during these times. They had their performance management processes, their performance criteria, but the ability to do work, performance is based on arguably output. So how much output do you generate over a certain period of time? That's the basic metric of performance. What that output is, what the underlying work is, varies, of course, job to job, and in fact, arguably unique to each individual. Right now, as we look at diversity of whether it be gender, socioeconomic diversity, our capacity, given the pandemic, is not all the same. As Matt Sigelman from Burning Glass eloquently said, we're all in the same storm, but we're not all in the same boat. And realizing that, if we have broad swath policies that don't acknowledge that someone is struggling, has less capacity, has more distractions day to day, and we're putting them against somebody who does not have those distractions and in fact has more privilege that led to this point where they have less distractions, it's not fair. It's not fair in the moment. It doesn't honor the struggle to that point, nor does it enable that individual to maintain pace in career development or feasibly catch up. And so what are we going to do? Are we just going to ignore that? Or are we going to ask the questions, honor it, and do something about it, and ultimately make an investment in people so they, number one, stick around, and number two, evolve professionally and contribute in ways that are meaningful in the moment, and meaningful and valuable in the moment, but also set the stage for future success. And so I hope organizations are doing that work on an ongoing basis. It's not easy. It takes dialogue systematically. It's not only a manager having a conversation once every few months with a direct report. It's actually asking questions via surveys and the like, doing focus groups, really staying attention, creating that ongoing dialogue, communicating the strategies that you're putting in place, which is ultimately going to elevate the confidence. It's going to elevate the experience. It's going to elevate the culture of the organization. So I really would love for listeners to hold on to this construct of capacity because it's underappreciated with remote work and given the diverse array of experiences that workers are going through right now. So with that, I'm going to wrap up. I really appreciate you all being here and listening and learning with us. And follow us in a couple weeks at PAFOW Global, January 27th and 28th. We're going to discuss this more, along with topics like workforce planning, talent acquisition strategies. I don't know, Ivy, there's so much: compensation, performance, engagement, remote return to workplace strategies, all that and more. So hope to see you then. Again, thanks for being here today, and we will have our next session at the top of the hour. So see you soon.